we've been on and off doing the meetups at 30th Street Station, this one bar one time, some random fucking places, to be honest. And recently I acquired this space, and I think this is more suitable for all different types of audiences, not just one little like geek group. Like we can have like business people, we can have like all different branches of people coming together, talking, learning, discussing, comprehending this new technology. And yeah, so without further ado, I would like to introduce you guys to Philip.
Hi. So I'm very excited. This is the first time I'm giving a public talk to Bitcoin. I think I have to change the Zoom. Normally I'm behind the camera. So I'm also going to record this and put this on YouTube. Sorry guys. Sometimes I'm taller than I seem to be to myself.
You want me to try to adjust it while you watch?
Yeah, I think this is okay.
This is
okay.
All right.
All right. So the talk that I'm going to give is something that I've always wanted to talk about. I always feel that when new people come to this space, they're heavily confused and overwhelmed with all the information about this complex new thing, right? That is Bitcoin or that is blockchain. And whenever you read news articles or anything like that, they're always kind of really detailed. And often the big question is, why does this work? Why is this special? Why is the price going up so much? And so really today I want to talk about why Bitcoin is such a big deal and look at it from a non-so-technical perspective. So to really understand what is it aside from like this network or distributed database or something like that. Today I want to really look at it from the perspective, what does this mean for mankind? Like that big of a perspective. And so literally, where does this fit into the evolution of mankind? Because I believe that it's kind of this big. And so I personally, when I learned about this technology, I kept investing, putting all of my money into it basically, which is very stupid, do not do that. But I really believe that is such a fundamental and big new technology. And so I want to explain to you why I think that or how I see that basically. Most of the thoughts in here are actually myself, my own thoughts, so I would also be very happy to hear your thoughts and your feedback, maybe even your criticism. At the end, I'm sure we're going to do like a Q&A session. So let me go through my slides. I got about 25 slides or 24 slides. I hope I can get through those within an hour, and then we can do a Q&A session and have some discussion. So I'm very excited to hear your reactions to my thoughts. So I want to start with very few. I just talked about news articles, and most of the time when I hear about news articles, I always feel like they don't really get it or they don't communicate it very well. It has gotten different in the last year, actually. But the first kind of article that I read where I thought, okay, these guys are getting it, is basically HBR. Which is the Harvard Business Review. Anybody familiar with the Harvard Business Review? So this is basically a magazine from Harvard for managers, for executives. So they always, when I was in college, I really liked their stuff because they were very good at basically putting things into perspective from like a high level perspective for managers, but also not just saying kind of fluff, but actually bringing across good information. And so what they are saying is, everybody has heard about how blockchain is going to change everything, right? And so I've heard that a million times, but very rarely has somebody actually been able to explain why that is. So if you claim to me that blockchains are going to change everything, please explain to me why. And so this is what I'm trying to do today. And so everybody also says that blockchain is disruptive, right? You probably heard that in news, it's going to disrupt everything. Well, these guys are actually saying that they're not a disruptive technology, because what they're saying, a disruptive technology actually makes things more efficient and replaces existing kind of solutions by more efficient one or something like that. So they're saying, and this is one of the very few cases where I've actually seen that, they're saying that blockchain is a foundational technology, so a fundamental technology, and they're saying it has the potential to create new foundations for our economic and social systems. That's pretty profound, right? That's pretty huge. And so while the impact will be enormous, it will take decades for blockchain to seep into our economic and social infrastructure. And so this is the only news article that I found that starts to actually talking about why this is a big deal. Because they're saying this is going to change society, right? So this is something you don't hear very often. They're always saying, oh, this is great technology, you can make a ton of money, blah, blah, blah. But these guys are saying this is going to change how we operate as humans or as a society. And this, to me, is exactly the reason why blockchains is a big deal, because this is not just like a new toy or something, or new technology that allows us to be a little more productive. This is going to change the way we operate in general, how productivity works in general, and leap us basically forward because of that. So all my talk is basically about exactly that part. Why is this the case, and how is this going to work, and how's this going to look like? So I hope you guys are not shocked. All right, so what does this mean in general? So today our society, and again I want to talk about... Okay, so so what does this mean, what they just said? And they've been quite diplomatic. I want to be a little more direct with what I mean with change the foundation of society. Our society today, everything works in the context of a country, of laws, police, courts, and military. These are the things that structure our society. Everything social we do is kind of structured, at least in modern countries, like that. We do have other examples. I'm going to talk about some of them. Now, in order to do money, so if you compare what the Bitcoin does versus the US dollar, you cannot do a US dollar type system or financial system with which we operate without this stuff. It's impossible. Because how are you going to do that? We have a Fed, we have regulations, we have banks. All of these things cannot exist without country, military, laws, all that stuff, right? The real thing that is special about Bitcoin is that it needs none of this, none of it. And all of this is replaced by a game of value, an economic system that needs no other structure. All it is basically, hey, I have this thing, you can participate, it's like a game. If you do certain things, you get rewarded. And that's it. That's the whole thing. And this is what is really the innovation of Bitcoin. So I remember sitting at the poker table and new people talk to me about it, and then they say, but Phil, it's not backed by anything. And what they're thinking about is they're thinking all of this, right? You know, they say like, yeah, the US dollar is backed by the US, the military, all of that stuff. And it's really hard to communicate that, can we just check if the camera's still on?
Take full speed.
It's on, yeah.
So I can keep an eye on it.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I see it. So this is. Okay.
How?
So to touch on, like, for example, to touch on the game of value, like, if you drive a solar car instead of a gas car, you get rewarded, or you get like a walking coin if you walk and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Participation value.
So the reason why I said game is because game theory drives the whole functionality of it, right? The reason why mining works is because of game theory,
Exactly.
right? So this is what I mean with game. So this is essentially governed by game theory. Somebody created a system, an economic system that works because of the game theory behind it. Yeah, so that to me is really, really profound. So I want to explain to you, and again, these are my words, why I think Bitcoin is so innovative and is such a big deal. So the key innovation of Bitcoin is it's not that it's a new form of money. It's a fantastic new form of money, but the key thing about Bitcoin is that it creates an organizational form that allows the creation of such a system that has the complexity of money, that you can create this now without needing the existing social structures that we have, such as a country or a kingdom or something like that, right? I'm going to talk about other social structures that are more primitive than ours that do not have money. So you need kind of a fairly complex social structure in order to do money. And so because of that, anyone can now create very complex system that before you can only create if you're a country. Any like high school kid can now create them. Need to program a little bit or something like that. But that is really, really profound, right? Just like Mark Zuckerberg could create Facebook out of like, his room in college somewhere. In the same way, some college kid can now innovate a new financial system. And that is really the key innovation of it. And all these social systems that we have, if you look at how the United States work, it's a fairly manual process. It was invented 300 years ago. We haven't upgraded the technology of how countries work since 300 years, essentially, when the French Revolution happened and America was created. Germany was created 50 years ago, but it works the same way as America works, pretty much, right? A little bit better, maybe, I think. So Bitcoin has actually invented a new form of organization, not just new money or anything like that. It has created a new form of organization. And so if you look at Bitcoin and you compare it to some stock or to some startup, you're just missing the point, right? And then it makes sense that you don't understand why this is so valuable. But it is so valuable because it's a new form of organization. And one thing that's very different about this form of organization is that from an individual perspective, a blockchain is free to enter and exit. Versus a country, if I'm born in the United States, I'm automatically a US citizen, I automatically have to pay taxes and these sort of things that are forces that are applied to me, versus in a blockchain, it's all kind of, you can take part of it, but you don't have to. So that's a little bit nicer from an individual perspective. Now, because this is such a new technology, it's pretty crappy. Like if we are really kind of fair and we look at Bitcoin, it's pretty sucky technology, right? Like you could look at a blockchain and compare it to like an in-memory database, and you could say, this is like 1,000,000 times slower, at least. Probably a lot more. Like what the hell, right? It's like super crappy tech. But this is because it is very new. So the infrastructure for all of this to work is not here yet. So because of this, this will be vastly underestimated by lots of people that do not see all of this. They just look at the tech and say, oh, this is a crappy database. This is a crappy way to send money. This is not easy to use compared to my PayPal or that sort of stuff, right? So again, if you just look at it that way, you're just not going to get it. So this is why I wanted to create this talk, to give you guys an opportunity to understand the value of Bitcoin and blockchains and all these projects that are out here without having to understand the technical code of the system. Okay, so why is this a big deal? I'm now just going to go into detail of this. So have you ever asked yourself why we humans are so dominating in this world? Like if we compare, there's no other animal or living being that basically dominates this planet like we do. Why is this? And to me, the answer, there's two aspects to that. Number one, the way we organize ourselves. We can work together with all the humans across the world, and we do this, right? Your phone, my computer, was built all over the world probably, was probably designed in the US and built in China somewhere, right? And has parts where like probably hundreds of thousands of people participated actually working on this piece that I have here in front of me. So that is organization, and the other thing is technology, right? So that allows us to be faster, or things that we naturally in our bodies cannot do. So these two things are really what make us so powerful as a species. So now I really want to talk about the history of technology. So what do I mean when I say technology? So think about a couple 100 million years ago, some animals and what came before humans started to use tools. I was in Africa a couple of years ago, and they were digging up things and were saying, here, this is a thing, that used tools. This is why we think this was like almost a humanoid. And then, of course, we had language and communications, and then later on, about 4,000 years ago, we had writing, where we were able to share our knowledge, right? So the earliest I'm aware of is maybe in Egypt or something like that, where they started to draw things and write things down. Much later, we developed things like money and property rights, and also organizations, so like countries or kingdoms, that sort of stuff. And then very recently, about 300 years ago, we invented machines. A machine is essentially a tool that works on its own without needing a human to operate it. And now we have computers which are machines of the brain, instead of just physical things that other machines are doing. And you can see that these things, they kind of are dependent on each other a little bit. Like you can't have machines before you have tools and stuff like that. And so these were invented kind of in time. And at the same time, we also have the history of social structure, right? And everything started with like a single being, like a single animal. Today we still have them like a leopard. And then we created social groups. Like big herds of animal, they're herding because of social benefits. Families are also such social groups, right? There's animals that live in families. And then humans started to create tribes. And then after tribes, and we still have some of these, right? You can go to the rainforest and you will have very basic or tribes where they don't even have clothes and stuff like that. And then we had these kings, such as Caesar or Henry VIII, and after that came countries and companies like the United States or Google or Apple or stuff like that. Right? So the form of organization has changed, and the key thing, in order to do some of these things, you need technology. You cannot create an organization like a kingdom without language or without laws. Right? So the more complex this organization is, the more technology do you need. And so here's a difference between a society, a society with more simplistic technology and kind of a modern city. So does anybody not know what the Maasai are? The Maasai are basically tribes living in Africa without money and things like that. So I was in Africa about 2-3 years ago.
That's Mali. They're in Mali?
So they live in Kenya and Tanzania. And they're one of the bigger tribes of Africa. Africa still has like 400 different tribes. And so people live very basic. And I was actually able to go to a village there. And this blew my mind, because I felt like I got put into a space that's like 400 years ago. If I think about how we lived 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, not 100, 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, this is how we lived. And so this Maasai village is essentially a group of no more than 60 people. No more than 60 people. They use tools, right? They have cows, and they have a very strict hierarchy. If you are a male, you are become, when you're 18, you get circumcised. You're not allowed to cry when you get circumcised. And then you become a warrior until you're 25. When you're 25, you get to marry a 17-year-old girl. And then you're not a warrior anymore. And then when you get richer, you get to marry more girls. So extremely strict hierarchy, kind of governed by the elder of the village. And if you and one of the things that's interesting is that you never have more than 60 people. Can you guys imagine why you can't have more than 60 people in a village like that?
You'd be able to overthrow. There'd be too many people at the bottom.
No, the problem is it's an economic problem.
Oh, okay.
Because when you work in a village like that, you have 60 people that work together in a social structure, right? So you are going to do things for other people in that social structure. Now, if you have more than 60 people, the relationships you need to manage and remember who did what for you, so you're going to give it back to him without money, you can't do that. So this is one of the things that money allows us. It allows us to transact with people without knowing them. Right? So this is why this is without money, you're limited in your structure to a certain size if you want to do complex things like humans do. And then so in a modern city, we have industry, we have the internet, we have money, we work together with people all over the world, right? Through economics. And we do have government and regulation and written laws. And in order for this to work, we have taxes, right? We have taxes that extracts value so we can run this complex organization. Here, instead of taxes, we basically have a culture that forces me to live a certain way. I.e., if I'm 17, I'm going to get married. If I'm 17 and a girl, I'm going to get married. If I'm 18, I'm going to get circumcised, and then I have to be a warrior. I don't have a choice in these sort of things. Just like here, I don't have a choice when I make money to give some away to the government. So these are kind of these social structures. So I feel like this is less free. I was very shocked when like these people told me how they lived, and I saw this. There was, by the way, a cow right next to me that must have never been petted because I started to pet it, because when there's an animal, I have to pet it. And it was like, it was like scared of me, and then after like 10 minutes, it started to like it. So that makes me think that they never pet their animals. Yeah, so it was really, really crazy. The reason why the cow is in that hut is so that it doesn't drink the milk from its mother. Yeah, so this was for me very interesting to kind of see this technology from really that's behind where we are today. And it's relevant for Bitcoin in my opinion. And so if we take a look at these technologies, one of the things that's also very interesting to me is that some of them are really new and some of them haven't been upgraded in a long time. So if you think about tools, there's being tools invented every day, everywhere. So I'm guessing 5 minutes ago somebody invented some tool somewhere on this world, right? Now language and communication has had a big upgrade with the internet, right? I mean, the internet is this fantastic communication tool. I don't know exactly when language was invented. The way we write and store knowledge also has been upgraded really recently. Like the way we learn today, I learn on YouTube. We have these new ways to do training on the internet, right? We also upgraded that a lot. But now take a look at money. Our money, I believe the money that we're using today, this fiat money, has been invented by the Medici. The Medici was this very powerful family that was like the only family we know of that has the same power like a king, because through their financial banking innovations, they were able to become as wealthy as a king. So the Medici basically invented that you can start using debt like money, like a piece of gold. Until then, that wasn't possible. All these kings, they always operated with gold, not so much with debt. So this debt-based money that we have today was invented by the Medici. That happened at the time of Leonardo da Vinci in the 14th century, so about 500 years ago. Now, we didn't really have big innovations since then when it comes to money. So money is one of those technologies that really should be innovated. The next technology that hasn't changed dramatically is the way we do countries, right? The United States has been invented 300 years ago. The French Revolution was 300 years ago. And since then, all the kind of modern democracies kind of work in similar fashion and quite manually. And so about the same time, machines have been invented, but they weren't really in the minds of people. So basically, the most important technology that we use to organize ourselves has been invented before we had machines. To me, that's ridiculous and crazy. So I've always, as a kid, I've always wondered, like, these political systems that we have, they suck. Somebody has to make them better. And so, yeah, so 300 years, and then computers came up about 70 years ago. Granted, for real, we've only been using them for like 20, 30 years. And artificial intelligence is now coming up. I don't know if we can say that we have it already. I feel like it is being invented as we speak right now. So this is also, for me, interesting because this shows me that blockchains and Bitcoin, they go and attack exactly what needs really to be innovated according to this list. We have all this fantastic technology, but very core fundamental technologies. Why is money so fundamental? We see this from the Maasai village, right? It limits us how we work together. It's very fundamental in anything we do. Is kind of the way we organize things and the way we use money. It's why we as humans dominate so much. And this is the thing that has been least innovated in the last 300 to 500 years. And so what Bitcoin is doing, it's coming here and it's innovating exactly that. So this is another thing. The fact that we are living today is a 300 to 500 year opportunity. You will not get an opportunity like this to be part of this in like a lifetime, like 500 years. That's like 10 generations. So this is insane. So this is the reason why I am stuffing all my wealth into it. And when people come to me and say, Phil, why don't you sell something? I'm like, I understand, but this is so profound to me that I don't want to get out. I have extreme FOMO when I'm not invested in Bitcoins and other blockchains projects. And this is funny, it's really funny, but it's also true. So Bitcoins and blockchains is a new form of organization and a new technology all together in one. And I really would wish I had good ways of visualizing how Bitcoin is a new technology and how Bitcoin is a new organization, but I'm not very confident, but I'm going to try anyway. So Bitcoin has a lot of technical aspects. To me, as a computer scientist, what is really special is that Bitcoin uses technologies like money and assets. It uses a network, it uses data, and uses programming application logic. And what we have done in computing is we segregated all these different functionalities. For instance, I work for a software company, and we sell software for millions to our customers. And all of our software uses a database, but we, as the company that are making these products, we do not make this database. We use a different company that makes the database, that specializes in database. So when we design things of complexity, we usually chop it up and have different modules that are specialized on certain activity. What Bitcoin does is completely wax that up and does everything together all at once. So this is why, even if you just look at the technology of the blockchain, you immediately see that this is very weird, very new, and very different. When you send a Bitcoin transaction, you are doing a financial transaction, you are using a network, you're executing a program, the script that verifies your private keys and that sort of stuff. You are changing data in a ledger. You're doing all of this. And you cannot do any of it without doing all of it, which is very different from how software or works before. You can change the database without it being visible on the front end and stuff like that. In Bitcoin, anytime, if you want to change the data, you also have to send money. And this is true with all blockchains. If it's not true, it's probably not a blockchain. Even in Steam, where transactions are free. So that's, I don't know if this is the best example, but it's just kind of an example that shows how Bitcoin is different from a technology perspective. And from an organizational perspective, I've just created a very simple governance model of Bitcoin. And this is also relevant because I sometimes feel like in the current debates in Bitcoin, it gets a little bit misunderstood. So let me just quickly talk about this life cycle or this value game, this game of value. We have a blockchain. That blockchain provides utility to users. The blockchain is run and governed by miners that have to put up stake. In Bitcoin's case, they have to buy mining equipment that is expensive. So they invest something and then basically run and govern this blockchain. This blockchain is useful to the users. That creates market demand and creates a market. And then the market basically rewards the miners. So the miners get rewarded when the Bitcoin price goes up. This is, for instance, also why as long as the Bitcoin price goes up, the miners are not incented to change anything because they get positive feedback from the market that they're doing a good job. We also have developers that build software that the miners are running. And so right now there's a little bit of a fight between these miners and different kind of users going on. So whenever we think about these things, it's always interesting to kind of think about this very, very simple governance model. This is much simpler than what the laws of the United States would be or something like that. So it's a very, very simple governance process, and I'm always amazed how well it is still working. Yeah, so this, as an example, just how this changes the organization and the technology of things. So I basically made this claim now that Bitcoin is going to change our society fundamentally, right? So I basically claimed that because of Bitcoin, we won't have probably things like the United States in the next 20 years or something like that. I don't know if we will have them, but I personally believe that such social structure will be prevented. Or not prevented, but will be replaced by more productive organizational structures that are driven by blockchain. That is basically my belief.
20 years.
Something like that, yeah.
Not enough.
You're making the face.
Not enough power. Not enough established resistance.
Yeah.
That Bitcoin's going to be completely.
So I want to talk about how this is going to work. Because you can't just go and say, hey, bye-bye United States.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen, right? They're like going to do things. Today we had this, or yesterday, the SEC came out, right? And basically claimed some of, put out a statements that sounds like they want to grab some of this value that has been created by ICOs. So this is, by the way, Jeanne d'Arc. You guys know Jeanne d'Arc? She's like a French woman that was a very famous part. Jeanne d'Arc, yeah. How do you say it?
You say Joan of Arc?
Okay. It's
Yeah.
German, French, okay. She was basically part of the French Revolution. And so I just took this picture, and it's not easy to change the status quo. So in order to change these social structures, something big really needs to happen. And but this is really what it means to say create new foundations for our economic and social system. So I really like how HBR has put that out there without saying it really directly, like I'm trying to do here. So let's look at the last time something like this happened, right? If we look at our social structure, we had like countries and companies, and before that we had a feudal system, kings. And in a feudal system, let me just really quickly explain to you how the feudal system worked. I'm not sure if you're aware. We had a king that had ultimate power. He gave grants and land to barons Barons gave grants and land to knights, and knights gave land to peasants. So this was basically the king owned all the land of a country and then gave it to like people that were loyal to him and then would give stuff back to them. Money and knights so they could do wars and get more land. And down at the bottom, the peasants would create food and would have give some of them to the nobles. So most peasants, they wouldn't own the land that they were on. They were actually kind of given it to them as a loan to some nobles and then had to give away most of what they earned to them that way. Now, the feudal system was based on land, and this is because before we had machine, depending on how much land you have and people living on that land, that was how productive you are. So if you owned land with 1,000 people, then that's how much wealth you were in control of. And it was there was a very direct correlation between land and humans to productivity. Now what happens when the industrialization came, that didn't matter anymore. You could create a factory and be way, way more productive as some peasants on a field. And so what happened is the baseline that the kings didn't own the factories anymore. Technology basically was driving productivity. So what happened here, I think I probably said this on the next slide, so the steam engine is the reason why we don't bow down to kings anymore. Because the steam engine made it so that the productivity of humans were not dependent on land anymore. So it moved a lot of wealth to these entrepreneurs. So the entrepreneurs now became as wealthy as royals, even though the king hadn't given them anything. And so that removed the dependencies of humans that were not royal from the king. And then these guys said, you can't chop my head off anymore. And because they were wealthy, they could actually do that. And so this forced the royals to surrender power to the rest of the people, and this is how we got our revolutions and things like the United States. So I think very few people actually understand this phenomenon, right? That the kings weren't just nice to us, or we didn't just come and say, hey, we want our power back, or anything like that. There was economic forces that made this. And so what I believe that the blockchain is doing is exactly that. Today you have a choice to run a project in a company and go public on Wall Street, or you can just do a blockchain. And more projects will, instead of going the company route, will choose to do a blockchain and put all the organizational stuff into a blockchain. Now granted, a lot of infrastructure is missing to do anything on a blockchain at this moment, but there are some use cases you can already completely do on a blockchain. We talked about a casino use case. You can totally run a casino on a blockchain. You don't need brick and mortars, you don't need a server. Those are the simple use cases that already you can do. So gambling is going to be a big part where the blockchain is going to suck up a lot of value and take it out of the existing legalized gaming space and put it into the blockchain, as an example. So this is how I believe structures will change. And once these blockchains become very valuable, then they can actually compete with the social systems that we have already. So that, I think, is kind of the path how we can get from not needing things like countries. Yeah. So blockchains make the need for countries and law less relevant. You can do things that beforehand you could only do with them now in a blockchain. Good example is Bitcoin. Financial system, before you needed a country to do it. With a blockchain, you can do it without a country. And just like machines, they remove the need for land and kings, the blockchain will remove the need for companies and countries, in my opinion.
I mean, does this get rid of all social, social nets or any, thing where taxes are being used to go and help the, citizens?
So I think there's a lot of things today that we do in a country that you cannot do with a blockchain.
Now, is part of the blockchain the fact that you are saying you don't have to take that money and invest it towards other people, anything beyond your own direct interests, or does it also allow for a setup for, if you want to have a social safety net for participants?
So
That's something that would require funding beyond just.
So these are a very good question. I don't know the answer to that. I don't understand how these structures will look like. I'm just assuming, just like when you see the steam engine, you probably can't imagine a democracy, right? So, like there's a big, I couldn't, like 30 years ago, I couldn't imagine Facebook, otherwise I'd build it, right? So I think there's a lot of, but I just see kind of similarities between these two things. And again, these are my thoughts. I've never seen anything like that, so maybe I'm just full of it. Who knows? So I do want to talk about a couple of these use cases. So casinos we talked about, right? In a casino, I can put the random number generation on the blockchain, and then instead of needing a government agency that regulates the casino, like Sugar House over there, makes sure. I think we need to. Why are you showing it for me? I definitely need a new camera.
Wake it up. It's bad.
So they have one of those like every 15-minute kind of shut-offs. Yeah.
So use cases, good use case casino. So if we think about, there's a casino just around the corner, it's called Sugar House, I go there all the time and play poker. What happens there are laws in place that tell the casino that they cannot cheat me. And then there is agencies that audit them and make sure everything is running according to the law. Right? So this is a good example. Now what we can do with a blockchain is we can put all that logic in a blockchain, and then we don't need any of that overhead. And then the gambling itself can be more efficient, and gamblers can actually retain a bit more of their money. So Sugar House pays actually 50% of its winnings from slots to the government. Right? That's a lot of money. Money, we already know how money works. With Bitcoin, it's a great example. I've talked about it a lot. The stock market is the next great example, in my opinion, looking at all these ICOs that happen, right? So if I want to go live, do an IPO in the stock market, first I have to do some VC funding, then I have to create a startup, then I have to get a real product so that I can actually go on the stock market. Then I have to pay a whole bunch of bankers and a whole bunch of fees to the government to actually go on the market, and then I can be on the market. This is a very long process. A lot of people need to get paid to make it happen. What I can do with a blockchain, I can just create a blockchain, create an ICO, I have stake, I have funding, all of that integrated. I'm immediately on the market with immediate market feedback. It's insane. Yeah, you have a question?
You can really kind of like just get around all that. This is similar to like the OTC market.
Yeah.
It's almost like the Wild West. Anyone can put
Yeah.
anything up, could be a scam, could be not.
Yeah.
So it's like very similar to OTC, more than like I'll just take NASDAQ and stuff like that.
Yeah, but I do feel that there's more functionality here.
Of course,
with,
yeah, absolutely.
With these blockchains. And
Some
so,
would say that part of the regulation is as a protective measure to say that it's being vetted by people who are maybe more knowledgeable in the investments than the layperson.
And there's always reasons why we have social structures. They also bring value. The question is, can we create structures that are more effective and more efficient? And so I think blockchains bring a lot more efficiency as well as effectiveness in these markets. So it's cheaper to go to do an ICO and get on the market. And I think it's also more effective because, for instance, a little guy like me can now invest into something where I could previously only invest as an angel investor or something like that. And then we have stake and we have rewards. I want to talk about one particular use case that I'm a really big fan of. Steemit. Are you guys aware of Steemit? Steemit is basically a social media application that runs on the blockchain. To me, Steemit is the first example that I'm aware of that really has an end-to-end product that end users are using that is entirely based on a blockchain. So basically what Facebook is using, all of that complexity, they're doing with an economic system and a blockchain. And the economic system is written into that blockchain. And one thing that is really, really interesting is if you go to Hypestat, and you can see how many people are using Steemit on a daily basis. And right now we have 120,000 users that go to the Steemit website, which is basically a blockchain explorer of Steem, the blockchain. And so Hypestat tells us we have 120,000 visitors. You can make $3,000 of ad revenue with that. Oh, and your site should be worth $2 million. The thing is now that according to CoinMarketCap, Steemit is worth $275 million. So about 100 times more valuable than with just the ad model. So if we compare the blockchain value creation system to an ad value creation system, we can say, like according to this, it almost looks like a blockchain value creation system is 100 times more valuable than an ad type value system. Now, I don't think this is fair to say because Steemit is also a very young and growing system. So because of this, there's also multipliers that jack up the value. But clearly, it wouldn't make sense for Steem to use advertisement on their website because these $2 million that they could generate in a year with ads are probably more annoying to its user than the value it already creates on its own, and it's more likely that they're going to screw up some of those $200 million in value by annoying their users than the value they would actually get from running ads. So to me that was mind-blowing, showing a real-time example of how blockchains are valuable, right? Which is the topic of today's talk. Now, to be fair, I also just wrote an article on Steem about this, where I said Steem is, where I basically looked at the value of Steem and if it's undervalued or not. And I feel like we can do this because we can compare it to Facebook and Twitter. And I noticed that the market cap per Steem user is about $2,500. So on average, every Steem account is worth $2,500. On average, a Facebook account is $240. So your Facebook account, actually your American, your account is probably worth like $500 or $600. So very, very interesting. And I compared this to Twitter, and so the Steem value of a user is like 10 Facebook users, 40 Snapchat users, or 60 Twitter users, right? Now, we have to understand that I believe there's a couple of drivers that make these Steem users so valuable. And a couple of things have nothing to do with the blockchain, and that is all the growth stuff. So we see here, this is the user growth on Steem. So anytime you have a market with growth, the market value is going to go up because the market likes growth. So there's a reason big growth potential because Steem is very small relative to Facebook. So as a social media system, it can grow a lot. So that's another reason why this value is not super directly comparable. Nonetheless, we also have a monetary reward system that is integrated into Steem because we're using a blockchain. And Steem, in my opinion, has this very interesting coin system where we have a stake coin and a stable coin and also the regular blockchain coin. So yeah, just as an example, showing that blockchains do actually create value. And this is also an example of all the things I talked about, how new technology is being created, but also in organizational form. In this case, a company that runs a social media site is being replaced by a blockchain. So this is to me the very first example of kind of all the things I'm talking about working today. So since we're talking about value, I assume a lot of people are here also interested about the whole investment type of things. So I wanted to say a couple of things here. First of all, when I invest, I really want to invest into things that are infrastructure. So imagine you could buy a piece of the internet, 30, 50 years ago or 30 years ago. This is basically what you do when you buy a piece of Ethereum or you buy a piece of Bitcoin. You also have a piece of the infrastructure. Or in Steam, it's very clear how you now own actually a piece of the system when you participate as a user in the system. So that to me is mind-blowing. So we can now go, imagine if you could buy a piece of the United States or something like that when it was invented.
But you're not really buying the infrastructure. You're buying, you're like getting space in the infrastructure. I mean, that,
If your Bitcoin is like HTML code, it's fine.
Yeah.
There's only a limited amount of that code. You have Bitcoin, you have
fine line.
you
Yeah.
have
Yeah,
something
it is.
something to build on.
It
if
is
you
a
need it.
fine line. To me, it looks like a piece of the system.
Sure.
Right? So piece of what I mean with infrastructure, like a piece of the system. And and so we now also make that whole infrastructure tradable, which I think is also very valuable. And so when I think about what to invest in terms of system or platforms, I like to not just buy little projects, but I like to buy the things that are platforms. So this is why I love Ethereum, this is why I love Bitcoin, and stuff like that. And and the organization. So one of the things why I like Dash, for instance, is because they changed the organizational way of govern the system that I personally think is superior to Bitcoin, which is also why I have a piece of Dash. So these are the things that I look at when I invest in. And this is really, really new that we can buy platforms or that we can buy infrastructure, right? Nobody can buy a piece of Linux or, Microsoft you can, but these platforms now through these tokens really become investable. And so these are the things that are also probably misunderstood by existing investors in the market because they don't understand this, they don't see this, and this has never existed before. So these things probably get undervalued by folks that lack understanding of this sort of stuff. Yeah, another thing that we really have to be careful as investors is that we are in bubbles. So I believe right now we're in bubble number 6. I have created a big video about, in February, I believe, 5 months ago. It already has 200 views where I talk exactly about this. So you really need to understand that because the space is driven so much by speculation, because we don't know the end goal of Bitcoin, we don't know the end situation of a lot of these projects, that creates a lot of hypes and bubble type factors. So also when you look at these prices, look at them in a really long-term perspective, and be aware that there's bubbles and crashes, and losing 80% of the market cap is completely standard and normal. And so a lot of people that, for instance, have bought into Ethereum, and Ethereum, the first time we've really gotten our ass whooped this year, right, when it went from 400 to 200. But Ethereum has only existed within a run, right? So Ethereum hasn't been part of a bubble unless this bubble right now is over and is going down, which in my opinion could be the case. But Ethereum basically started to exist when Bitcoin started to run. So a lot of us that are kind of new in these markets are not really aware of that. So please always, when you invest, think about that. I've created a video.
You also have different maturity cycles of
Yep.
what you just said, Bitcoin versus additional coins. You have the benefit of the existence of Bitcoin for as long as it did to allow basically that growth trajectory to be at a more extreme level, because you feel as though you're playing catch up to an already established high level.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And also, when you invest, there's different kinds of strategies that you have. I personally usually have, well, most of my investments, I've taken a VC type approach where I buy into a project, I try to buy it as early as possible, and then I assume that my money is gone. Just like an angel or a VC investor would do, they buy like 100 projects or 1,000 projects, and they hope that 1 or 3% of them go through the moon like Google did, right? So this is kind of the VC type of approach. I have a very good friend, his name is Chris. He just wrote a Steemit article where he shared his strategy. I talk with him about the strategy a lot, and he has an ABC type strategy. And he basically says that anything that I have in my portfolio, if it goes up 10x it needs to make a big impact on my wealth. So he puts basically, he has 50% of his portfolio in the two biggest projects, Ethereum and Bitcoin. And then another 30% he puts into 6 other projects that he thinks are going to make a killing. And then he has his B picks and his C picks. And so he basically distributes his portfolio this way. Another thing that you could do is a topic-driven portfolio where you say, I want to be part of all the big things that are coming. So gambling, financial innovation, infrastructure, and that sort of stuff. And actually, my friend Chris, he does both of this. So he makes sure that in his prime picks, he only has one thing of one kind. So he wouldn't put, for instance, storage and Filecoin both in his prime pick. He would make a decision which one he thinks is better and then put that into his prime pick. Like that. Another thing in America we have to be aware of is taxes. One reason why I'm doing this VC type of approach primarily is because I don't want to trade too much, because that would create big tax bills for me. So when I let my projects run, I don't have to pay taxes. I only have to pay taxes when I sell them. And so anytime you basically trade and you win, you cut into your profitability, because you always have to pay at least 15, 30, or if you're unlucky, even 50% taxes.
Can you skip ahead here?
So that's pretty much it for my talk. So thank you very much. There's a bunch of social media channels where you can contact me, and thank you for your now hold on. Do you guys want to do a Q&A session?
I just wanted to ask one quick question. I guess everybody has theirs, I guess. But what's your opinion on how ICOs is going to affect the current system that's in play, that it is threatening the whole... I know that SEC is getting involved and everything. Eventually it will be semi-regulated. There'll still be dark markets for that though. So how do you think like ICOs and where they're going to go next with the whole regulation thing starting to come their way? How do you think that will affect?
Yeah, so I think ICOs are very interesting. ICOs is kind of the thing that came up this year, even though it has been existing for a long time. And the SEC just issued a report. I haven't read the report just yet, but I think it makes sense that just like Bitcoin is being treated as money, that ICOs and the tokens in ICOs are being treated as security,
Exactly.
i.e. like stocks. So that governments can regulate them and also have a piece of it, to be frank, right?
Yeah.
So I think that governments are going to try to basically keep access to these things, but what I really think is that ultimately they won't be able to control it
Not at all.
because of the properties of blockchain.
Exactly, that's like making drugs illegal. It just makes it a different market and causes it to be more valuable in that market. So when ICOs do get regulated and you find your unregulated exchanges, those tokens are going to have more value because of the illegality around it.
Do you think the SEC is getting involved strictly to try to control it, or just to protect investors?
Well, I personally don't know. Again, I haven't read that report, but I think technically what is relevant is that they will only have so many tools to actually get access to ICOs. Because what prevents you from building a smart contract where somebody sends tokens to, like Ethereum, then gets a token in return that has some functionality that is valuable? How can the SEC intervene there or get access to it? Right? It's very hard to regulate anything if you cannot control it. And so that, I think, is what is going to have this effect that I talked about, where it's going to move value from an existing power system into a new system.
So a better question, do you consider a positive or a negative that the SEC is now considering it a security? Because
So for the market,
it could be, an argument could be made like both ways.
so for the market, it's clearly negative, and we have seen this in the reaction of the markets, right? The markets went down about 30% in a day. You could argue because of this, or maybe something else. But I think looking at the market, it's clear that the market doesn't like it. But I think long term, it's just not going to matter.
I mean, what about the whole concept of, in order to get more people investing in the coins, if people can go into their TD Ameritrade account, or something that is regulated, which allows them to go and take money, which, maybe we know how to go and get into Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, but there's so many people out there who don't. If it was made
Yeah.
easier through that would mean more money coming into the
Fidelity
coins.
has that now, don't they? I mean, on their,
Yeah.
they own your IRA, and you can go
So-
right to Coinbase there and.
Yeah.
Well,
So
It
obviously,
started, I mean,
Yeah,
6 months ago, a year ago.
So obviously, it is the case that there's existing infrastructure, and when with the existing infrastructure, we can invest. This is helpful. But there's also the situation where I cannot buy EOS or Filecoin because I live in the United States, or I have to get accredited. So I guess it goes both ways. Ultimately, I see these technologies opening up these possibilities and making it easier for anyone to enter.
Do people right now, unless you're a minor, you have to choose to convert your fiat money into the cryptocurrencies, which means, being that, 100% or however many percent of people in the US and people in the world have some sort of fiat currency, in order to make that conversion, you would have to go and have,
Here's the best way to go.
So I think 99% of people have, or more than 99% of all the value currently is in fiat system. So the only way you can actually partake is with fiat systems. There's very few examples, such as mining. With Steemit, you can write blog articles and blog posts, and then you get coins. So I actually have a friend who made lots of money last year, more than at her job, just blogging on Steemit. So there's other ways, but on the other hand, the fiat rail is the most important at this point in time. You had a question.
Yeah, so you briefly went over just like kind of your strategy of how you evaluate some of these coin exchanges, new ICOs and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Cover more of a stock background, so excuse me, there's a little disconnect from me
Yeah.
to this. But so when I look at a stock, I can evaluate it by looking at SEC filings, Q10s. I
Yeah.
can call partnerships
Yeah.
confirmed. I can
Yeah.
call town halls that you have construction going at this location from this company. Stuff like that to ensure that these new things are happening.
Yeah.
How exactly am I supposed to evaluate these kind of companies?
So
these kind of ICOs?
remember when I said that there is infrastructure that is lacking?
Yeah.
This is exactly a perfect example of that. Your problem is a problem I have as well. I want to invest in these projects, and then I have to research
Yes.
whether it makes sense to invest into them. And there is exactly infrastructure that's lacking. So one of the things I've been thinking about is how can we create like a website or something where we can crowdfund information like that. I don't know a central.
Market capitalization has some information like that too. If you look on there and you look at the market and you see the social media and the different things like that, you
Okay.
can kind of peruse on there and
Where is that?
the market capitalization.
Yeah, the CoinMarketCap.
Coin
Yeah,
market.
so CoinMarketCap, the website is my first choice where I go, and then usually I try to read white paper, I try to watch presentation from the founders. It is all very kind of a manual. There is no central or product or website where I can go and kind of get this formalized way of analyzing these things. And this is a perfect example of the lack of infrastructure. I'm pretty sure in the next years, somebody will come up with a nice business idea to create that sort of
Yeah, like
infrastructure.
my Ether wallet popped up and they work off of donations and stuff like that. Somebody's gonna come up with a website or a platform where they validate, and based off their validations and the truth of that, their reputation will build. That's where, like you said, there's a need for a service.
Yeah.
Somebody's gonna create the service where they vet these ICOs, and because they put the work in, anybody who's intelligent enough that wants to do it could vet the ICO, put it on their website, say, this is all the information I found, this is my stamp of approval, it's legit, and then you go to that website, you invest in it, later on it turns out to be something that was legit. That website, putting its stamp of validation on something that did turn out to be legit, builds its reputation, there we go.
Standard rating system.
Yeah, exactly, but it would be decentralized.
There's
Yeah.
a question.
So, you have a question?
No, actually, I just wanted your opinion on that split with Bitcoin Cash, being as though they say it's going to reduce transactions.
It's one of many
Yeah.
altcoin, Bitcoin's fork.
So I guess you're talking about Bitcoin Cash.
BCC, Bitcoin Cash,
Yeah.
about August 4th.
So generally, it's there's a lot of these fork ideas that are popping up, which is basically a way of parts of the industry or user wanting a different version of Bitcoin, and they're not getting this in their in kind of the main chain. I personally am not a big fan of Bitcoin Cash, to be honest. Right now, we have like 99% of all the miners are kind of signaling for this SegWit 2x, right? So if we really think about that, so I think it'll be really, unless the economic majority has an extremely different view than the miners currently, only if that is the case, that there's a very big discrepancies between what the market wants and what the miners
But
want.
how many people are mining Bitcoin here? You have contracts, right? How
I
many-
have cloud mining contracts, and my buddies actually
How many
bring
other
over
people
hardware.
mine Bitcoin?
Yeah. So
There's no.
unless there's a big discrepancy,
I mean,
Can I-
BCC,
it's
Bitcoin
nothing-
Cash
nothing
is like an
different.
iPhone without Wi-Fi. It's
Yeah.
a product that doesn't have an update that the next one got. Why would you want it?
yeah. So let me answer the question, please. So unless there's a big discrepancy, I personally believe that the fork will not be very successful because it needs a big part of the economic majority in order to jack up the price. So I don't think that is going to happen, but I haven't studied it in detail.
I've had sort of a theory that I think ties into that.
Yes?
I think one of the reasons that a lot of people are hesitant to get into Bitcoin is or any cryptos is that there's such erratic swings up and down,
Yes?
and they want a stable place to store their value. And I think one of the reasons that Bitcoin is more stable than many of the others is because of its inefficiency, and it makes the transactions much slower. When you can, in a few seconds, sell or buy or trade or something, it enables these erratic swings, which is keeping people out of the market. So I think Bitcoin getting slower and slower is stabilizing it and causing more people to come in. And with a new technology being applied to Bitcoin that's going to speed it up, I think that will actually make it less valuable as sort of a new U.S. dollar, like something that can store value.
So first of all, I think you're very right. The most important attribute for money is actually stability and value. You can only use something as money if its value doesn't change. I also believe that Bitcoin has a life cycle where in the beginning of the life cycle it's speculative. Later on, as it grows, it will get more and more stable, and then it could actually function as a day-to-day money. Today, it cannot really do that. Today, basically, the people going into Bitcoin, they're using it as an investment or speculation. To me, that's kind of the same thing. Yeah. So I think what you said is very right, and it's also important to not use that to say basically Bitcoin sucks, because people that just say, oh, Bitcoin doesn't work because it is volatile, basically don't understand that, or I believe that this life cycle design used by Satoshi is basically a way to onboard value into the system, because how do you can't just take all the value in the world and put it into a system like that, right? You need a vehicle how you can do that. So in Bitcoin, this is all about, well, it is a different thing as it grows up.
I sort of think that it's good to have something like Bitcoin that could act as like your world reserve currency that could back other cryptocurrencies that could be used for more day-to-day transactions. But you could have one that's intentionally slow so that it can hold the value and back the other ones that could be lightning fast and allow really
So
quick
the question, one interesting question for a talk would also be, what is ideal money and what is Bitcoin's role in that? We have somebody called Nash that just lived very close to us here, that did a lot of research in that space. I also think there may be innovation. So for instance, Steam actually has a stable coin as part of its blockchain. So this may also be something that still has to be innovated.
When you say Nash live close to you, you're talking about the guy, Beautiful Mind.
Yes, definitely.
Yes, yes. I was gonna say,
So
you're making it sound like it's a guy down the street.
Yeah, so he
Got it.
actually, and he died a couple of years
Yes,
ago.
yes.
Yeah, he wrote basically this talk called Ideal Money. And if I interpret it correctly, he basically says ideal money, the most important property of money is stability.
I'm also concerned about the pending fork coming up, so I was kind of curious to get your take on exactly how that is going to work. From all the reading I'm doing, everyone's saying you can't have any of your coins on any kind of exchange.
If you don't have
Even to your
private
hard
access
wallet.
to the private
Mhm.
key.
Right, so when I have my private keys, and I have that already.
Paper wallet will work too, guys, just so you know.
And so what I'm curious to know is, when the fork happens, are 16 million coins that are in market going to be duplicated?
Yes.
And I'll have a private key of 123 ABC on 2 chains, and then, so when,
Yes, exactly.
which,
More than 2 chains.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
which, like, so
It's up
that,
to you.
obviously my
Yeah.
BTC, I understand that, I can even maybe send them back to Coinbase. But for the other BTC,
Yeah, so
private key,
what
where does that
would-
get sent? How's it?
Can you
What would-
access them? There's no graphical interface or so. I think they're saying that they need to wait till after the split
Well,
happens.
no,
before
Kraken
they
has
can
said
go
that they're
forward.
gonna be exchanging BCC. There's a couple exchanges that are already prepared for this.
But how do you go and you get it off of?
Your Ledger wallet or a couple of your
Yeah.
wallets, I'm sorry to cut in, man,
Yeah.
I know about this, they're gonna make it already, you're just gonna wake up and when you plug in your Ledger wallet, you're gonna have Bitcoin, and you're gonna have BCC or whatever, you're gonna be able to click on it and export it to an exchange, sell it, and buy more Bitcoin with it.
I mean, that was the same thing when you were holding Ethereum.
A little bit,
So-
exactly, yeah, there's gonna be a tool and a feature built
That
in
was
your
pretty
wallet.
seamless.
So if you keep
Did
it-
you understand that?
Yeah.
So essentially, as long as you have a wallet where you control the keys, you will be able to use that private key in whichever wallet is going to work with the fork.
Gotcha.
Right? So what you want to do, you want to have control over the keys. So today you want to have, if you are worried about that Coinbase may not give you the coins that you should own, then what you should do is put the Bitcoins today in a wallet where you control the keys, and then you'll be able to extract the keys and put them in some other wallet.
Yeah, so I do have that.
It's not one which you should be able to do.
Yeah, Bitcoin Core, Jax, most of these or a lot of these wallets on your phone, a lot of these wallets.
Don't
I
use
love
Jax.
Jax.
I love Jax, but don't use Jax.
Just is.
Yeah,
It's got a
just
security
like you
problem.
know, I love Jax. I will always support Jax, but not right here, not now.
Yeah, so
So I guess my secondary question is,
the best thing is of course a hardware wallet.
I have a treasure, so I'm
Yeah,
ready.
so then put it
I
on
do
Treasure.
wanna-
Treasure said you're gonna wake up one day and you're gonna have 2 wallets.